Virtual Legality is a YouTube video series with audio podcast versions presented as commentary and for education and entertainment purposes only. It does not constitute legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship. If you have legal questions about the topics discussed, please consult your own legal counsel. Honestly, you don't want to be taking generic legal advice from a YouTube channel or podcast in any event. On with the show. The Playond paywall. Did a foreign subscription service just steal multiple award-winning apps? Hello and welcome to another episode of Virtual Legality. I'm your host, Richard Hoeg, managing partner of the Hoeg Law business law firm of Northville, Michigan. And today we're going to talk a little bit about digital licenses, the Apple App Store, and what appears to be a fairly nefarious practice that I actually haven't seen done in the digital landscape before. Although it's going to be one of those types of issues that I think a lot of people are going to react negatively to and might run afoul of the actual license terms in the Apple terms and conditions, the terms and conditions that govern your use of the Apple App Store, as well as the third-party developers that are licensing applications through that store. Now, this story came to my attention only a couple of hours ago on a Reddit post in the subreddit for games, and I thought it was very interesting, and I spent the last hour kind of trying to verify some of the claims, some of which I can verify, some of which I can't. We're going to talk about the differences there, but let's take a look at this actual story, because I think at bare minimum, it's worth bringing to folks' attention, because I know people that have listened and have watched to Virtual Legality have a certain sensitivity towards digital gaming and towards the fact that software is licensed. And frankly, software is licensed whether you're getting it on a physical press disc or whether you're getting it sent to you through the sky digitally. But with that license, and we've talked about it in the past, and I'll try to put some cards up for some videos that we've done in the past on this, with that license comes terms and conditions, certain restrictions on what it means. And very often those terms and conditions mean in the digital space that if we want to take that license away in the future, we reserve the right to do so. Now, we've also talked about the business reasons why somebody wouldn't want to do that, because they want to have customers. They want to have people that trust that they are going to spend this money and that they're going to be able to watch that movie on Vudu for the next 10 years or play that game on the App Store for the next 10 years. And to the best extent possible, these corporations, even these giant ones, have a great deal of incentive to keep their customers happy by making sure that third-party developers and others don't pull licenses. But in this particular case, somebody seems to have done just that. So let's take a look at this story. Again, this is on a Reddit thread, so take it with a grain of salt, but it appears to be legitimate in kind of its baseline contentions, as far as I can tell. It says, a mobile game subscription service called Playond has just revoked existing customer licenses for several games and put them behind a sub fee, a subscription fee. And then it gives a little background towards whether or not this person in particular, this was posted by a user named Tulki, likes mobile gaming. But he says a day or two ago, a company called Bending Spoons Apps IVS suddenly became the publisher for a bunch of paid games on the App Store. They manage a game subscription service called Playond, which has its own app. At the same time, they've pulled the paid games they acquired from the store. And this is where we get a little bit dicey, because as best I can tell, they've done this for a few of the games and not others so far, with every indication that they will do this in the future, and we're going to talk about that. Updated and reposted them under their own brand as free-to-download games gated behind an in-app purchase subscription fee associated with that Play-On service. This includes quite a few genuine decent games like Wonderblade, Crashlands, Faust, and others listed here. The result of this pull and update is that licenses held by customers were effectively voided, and the only way to access these games now is by subscribing to Playond, whether you owned them before or not. Then they have claims about the parties that allowed this to happen, Playond and Apple, etc., etc. And this is just kind of a bringing it to your attention post, but we're going to talk about it in Virtual Legality, like we do, to talk about terms and conditions and those kinds of things. So that's the state of play. The basics behind this story are that you could buy these games for $2, $3, $5 on the App Store. Another party came in and either exclusively licensed them from their existing developer or bought the company outright or bought the assets outright and then pulled the apps down from the store and replace them with functionally identical versions, but with a gating mechanism, a lockout, that allows you to only play these games on their PlayOn service. And in so doing, because it's a different application, however that might be, they've locked certain people out of the games. Now, I looked on this on the App Store, and as best I could tell, some of the games that they have done this with so far now feature that kind of PlayOn language at the very front end. Now, I could look at 2 games, basically, that I had previous access to. One of these, which I'm kind of circling with my mouse right now for you people watching on the video, is called Crashlands, which is a fun little game. And I looked at it, and I had it on my phone already. I deleted it. I re-downloaded it. Doesn't appear to be an issue with Crashlands right this second. But it also doesn't appear to have the update that puts it on the PlayOn service exclusively. Now, that can mean one of 2 things. That can mean that it's currently available on PlayOn, but not exclusively, that you can still buy the app separately, or you can use it through PlayOn, and that might be part of a license arrangement with a developer. And when we get to the end of this video, we'll show why we have reason to believe that that might be the case for Crashlands. But the other game we took a look at was Wonderblade, which I'm circling right here, which has language in its App Store description now that describes the PlayOn service, describes it as a PlayOn exclusive, describes the subscription fee necessary to play it, and does appear that you would have to go through the PlayOn service to play that game right now. Now, I can't verify that myself because I didn't own Wonderblade before any of this news came out, but it does look to me like with the version update, with what's set out there, that you probably aren't able to play the game without paying the weekly or monthly fee to play on, which I believe is $2.50 per week, things of that nature. And if that is in fact the case, and we're going to act on the basis of assumption for the rest of this video, if that is in fact the case, then this company really did pull down existing content that was useful, what purchased outright. Wonderblade has some 2018 Game of the Year awards. It was a big deal, and has replaced it with the same version, but now behind a paywall. And you can understand why some people would be upset about that. And in fact, that Reddit post starts talking about whether Apple should react, whether anybody should support PlayOn and this company in general. And I think what's important to kind of look at when we're discussing this issue is the Apple terms of service. I looked at the PlayOn terms of service. I looked at the Bending Spoons terms of service. To be honest, they're a little hidden. I will link them here. I will look at them just for a second so that we remember to put them in the description to the video. They are hidden behind a /tos.html, which you had to basically find by going through the App Store. It doesn't have a very apparent link on the actual PlayOn.com website. I looked at these. They're pretty standard. If you've been through virtual legality before, if you've gone through us looking at terms and conditions and EULAs before, end user license agreements before, you know that standard means not terribly favorable for the customer. They reserve a lot of rights to themselves. They say it's licensed, not sold. We can terminate the license basically whenever we want. All the goodies that you're now used to when we're talking about the digital landscape. But just looking at the EULA, the license agreement for the actual PlayOn service, that doesn't really help us understand whether what they did by pulling these other games down and putting new games up is actually permitted. That's actually going to take its relationship to Apple and our relationship to Apple. So that's what I found more interesting. Looking now at the Apple Media Services terms and conditions, we see here that this is a document that Apple Legal provides that describes all the rights and obligations that are associated with using the App Store, using it on your phone, using it on your iPad, wherever you might find the App Store. It says this agreement governs your use of Apple services, which is a defined term, capital S, through which you can buy, get, license, rent, or subscribe to content, apps, capital A, and other in-app services. Collectively, all that stuff we just referenced, content. So when we see the word content, we're talking about everything we care about. It says content may be offered through the services by Apple or a third party. And Apple basically reserves the right to sell access, licenses to these games for a cut. They do it on behalf of these third-party licensors. So when you've got Bending Spoons and they provide PlayOn, or they provide Crashlands directly, if that's what they're going to do in the future, then that comes through a third party, but through the facilitation of Apple. And they have a lot of language in this contract where Apple says, hey, we're not actually selling this to you, so if this does bad things to your iPad, it's not on us, and other things that you would expect from a kind of third-party facilitator. Now, here's the key part that I thought was interesting. Redownloads. You may be able to re-download previously acquired content. I look at that as a lawyer. I say, okay, that may is important. It's not shall. What do you mean by may? It says, to your devices that are signed in with the same Apple ID. You can see content types available for re-download in your home country at this website. And I pulled that up. Basically, it says, and I'm really concerned specifically right this second because I am an American, because I do practice law in the United States, with the U.S. And basically, it says you can re-download apps as long as they're available. The last sentence of this paragraph is the important part. It says content may not be available for re-download if that content is no longer offered on our services. Now, here's the fun part for those of you that want to go to law school or have already been to law school. Is that the same content? If you take down Wonderblade and you put it back up as something that's now locked behind the PlayOn subscription gate, it's a new version number of an app slot that already existed on the store. But now people can't play it without paying you more money for subscriptions, or they can't re-download the application in a fashion that would allow them to play it in the way that they were used to. Is that a violation? If you can re-download it and it's just now a title screen that says you owe us now $20, is that a violation? How about $50,000? If it's not a violation for just having a subscription screen, when is it a violation? And those are the kind of questions that you would wind up asking if you're litigating this. If you're the lawyer on either side of this thing, you say, okay, I have a reason to believe that if you put up the same darn game, that's 99% the same application, that content is now once again available on your service, and I should be permitted to re-download it by virtue of the license agreement that you wrote. This is a contract of adhesion, which we've discussed in virtual legality, but is a term of art, which means I didn't negotiate this. This was a click-through that I had to go through to use your application. You wrote this language, and you said if content is available, basically I should be allowed to re-download it as long as my home country is covered by the type of content that we're talking about. In this case, applications. Now, the other side might say, okay, well, we changed it. It's not the same thing, so we can lock it out. Now, we're looking at this as a legal question, right? We're in virtual legality. We're thinking like lawyers. We're taking this as a legal point of law. That's not where this ends, right? If this Reddit post winds up lighting a fire under NeoGAF or Reset Era or Twitter or social media in general, Apple will respond to this. And the reason Apple will respond to this is because of what we talked about at the top of this video. These businesses are selling these licenses, selling this access on an understanding that people don't fully grok what that means, and that they think that they're owning a perpetual right to play this game. And for the most part, they are. Mostly, we're not talking about every other game being pulled down from these services or losing access to that game that you purchased with your hard-earned money. But it's very important for these platforms, Steam, Epic Games Store, Apple, the Nintendo Store, the PlayStation Network, Xbox Live, to continue to try to build goodwill. Because when you lose that goodwill, when you have a story like this, where essentially a third party comes in, buys up a lot of assets, and then locks them out, even if it's permitted, even if they could win the legal argument right here, you have to find a way to terminate that agreement. You have to find a way to say, you can't do this on our store because this makes it look bad. And this isn't about our 30 cents of your dollar. This is about our 30 cents of everyone else's dollar, because if we actually lose the eyeballs that are going to pay attention to our marketplace, that's not just going to be bad for you. It's going to be bad for us, and it's going to be bad for every other developer in this ecosystem, and we can't afford that. So we need to be able to control that. And in general, Apple reserves certain rights to make your life difficult if you're a developer or a publisher and you're not doing what they want you to do. A lot of the times we have stories in virtual legality where we talk about that being a negative, where we talk about Apple acting like a tyrant, or Google or YouTube or anybody else acting like a tyrant. But in this specific instance, we're not looking at a law or a rule that is very easy to kind of put in a bucket as having been broken here, but still one where I think people are going to be justified in their belief that this is predatory and exploitative and all those words that we consistently analyze in virtual legality to see if they're really applicable to the transaction or to the relationship at hand. Now, they do have a few other bits of language here. They say services can be offered through paid subscriptions. The actual app that Bending Spoons is putting together is fine, but it's really a matter of whether or not they can do what they have stated to have done here. And we see here that they've got essentially a default end user license agreement that they put forth that is the standard that automatically attaches to every game that doesn't have a custom EULA that is negotiated specifically with Apple, which is generally going to be done by bigger publishers. You're not usually going to spend time or money negotiating separate EULAs with Apple. And you see here the baseline license to the software. App licenses are provided to you by Apple or a third-party developer. Apple acts as an agent for the app providers in providing the App Store and is not a party to your sales contract, so don't sue us. Any app that you acquired is governed by the licensed application and user agreement set forth below, and Apple may enforce such agreement as a third-party beneficiary. So that's important to remember. If you feel you've been burned by the baseline end user license agreement, Apple could step in and say, you're burning our users. We're a third-party beneficiary, in this case, of goodwill, like we just talked about. And that's a problem for us. So if you don't do better, publisher or developer, we're going to enforce it against you on behalf of our users, that kind of thing. And I certainly think we talk a lot about outrage. We talk a lot about protests and big things happening in virtual legality, some of which are justified, many of which are not. This is the kind of thing where I think you can get the attention of a big company. I think Apple probably, if this is in fact occurring to the extent that the Reddit post claims that it is, I think Apple probably isn't aware of it at present. This thread only went up 3 hours ago. And if they become aware of it and it's actually happening as described, then I think Apple will probably do something about it. But it's worth your time and interest to follow these things, to look at the law, to look at the terms and conditions, and see where Apple might have a reason, an ability to make life difficult for these developers and publishers. The scope of the license under the end user license agreement is that the licensor grants to you a non-transferable license to use the licensed application on any Apple branded products that you own or control. And that's really throughout the lifetime of their being made available to you, as we talked about in the earlier language. So what we're really talking about in this agreement is a situation where you've got a third party that appears to be reoffering you what you already purchased. And I do think it's justified for Apple to step in and say, you can't do that. All right, we understand you want to make your service better. We understand you want to sell this subscription service. At bare minimum, you can buy up all these assets. You can put them under that exclusive, but you can't turn off the ability of people to download what they've already purchased. You can't lock them out through a version update of a game that they already own. And I'm not 100% certain that that is actually the plan for this product and service. It is possible, devil's advocate, that while they are putting this together, they are still figuring out exactly how to allow people that have purchased the game already to purchase that version while still having this kind of exclusive concept in their subscription service. In particular, and I promised this at the end of the video, I found while I was looking up and researching this article, this video, this thread on Reddit, that the Crashlands developer, which I believe is called Butterscotch Shenanigans, which is just a fantastic game developer name if I do say so myself, actually had a post they put up on their blog about this situation from a couple days ago. It says, "Hello all, Seth, the B-Scotch Games programmer here with some big news about Crashlands on mobile. A while back, we were contacted by the folks at Bending Spoons who were building a new mobile game subscription service called Playond. They were looking for some of the best games they could find to bring into their portfolio, and they were hoping Crashlands could be one of those games. So, what does this mean for you, the player? Crashlands on iOS will no longer be pay up front, and instead will be free to try as part of the PlayOn service. As a new player, you'll be able to try out the game for free, so you can decide whether to get full access to the game. If you already bought Crashlands on mobile while it was pay up front, then nothing should change for you. Existing Crashlands players, those who bought the game on mobile, do not need to sign up for PlayOn in order to continue playing the game. You bought Crashlands as a paid game with the expectation of unlimited gameplay, and that expectation will be met. Now, as we said, Butterscotch Shenanigans here clearly didn't go anywhere. They didn't sell their whole company to Bending Spoons. So that means that they licensed the publishing rights to their game to Bending Spoons. And that license is going to be in the form of a contract, unless they're really crazy and they did a handshake deal of some kind, but I doubt it very much. So that contract is going to have terms and conditions. And at least as far as this blog post reads, it indicates that that contract would have certain permutations, certain parameters built into it that says, hey, you're going to keep the Crashland that people bought on the store. You're going to make it available because that's important to us. That's our goodwill. That's our Butterscotch Shenanigans goodwill, and you won't destroy it. And so far, as I mentioned at the start of this video, my Crashlands copy is still downloadable. It doesn't have a reference to Playond on it right now, however, so I am curious as to whether they just haven't gotten, they being Bending Spoons, haven't gotten to the point where they are putting it on their service just yet. The other games that I was able to look at does have Playond reference, does have a reference to exclusivity, does have subscription terms, and does look like a different kind of application interface than what it might look like if you just bought it outright on the App Store as other games are available. So in this particular case, I am curious as to whether they have a different license with this company for Crashlands, whether they just haven't gotten to the point where they've been able to enact what they've done for the other games with respect to this game, and whether that delay, if it is a delay, is related to the fact that they got the different license terms for this purpose. I will say, in my experience, working with game developers, working with app developers, having been an app developer myself, if you're not familiar, my brother and I put together a couple games that were pretty well received that we sold on the App Store. And there are certain things with respect to using the Apple Store interface that are unexpected. And I think if you're going to have two applications out there and you're going to have one locked behind a subscription paywall and you're going to have one that's not, but is not generally for sale and is only available for re-download for the people that originally bought it, I can imagine a situation where just kind of technological limitations may have caused Bending Spoons to stumble and that they never intended to have it not available for re-download for those people that originally purchased it with respect to these other games that they're using. That may or may not be the case. It's going to be a continuing question, but it is worth going down this road in virtual legality because all of these questions are going to continue to be raised. Before I leave you from this episode, I brought up that this was going to be the topic that I was going to cover today with my wife, and she mentioned to me that we had purchased a number of kids apps from various companies that I won't name here that were supported for a period of time, but then either left from being able to be re-downloaded or kind of more perniciously, you could go into your purchase list, re-download kind of the shell of the application, but they had removed all functionality and all support and whatever network pings they were using to make the game function, and then everything you had bought in that game you couldn't access. Everything that was previously available to you, you couldn't access. And then to put really the cherry on top, a number of these companies had built essentially super apps that combined a lot of their smaller apps into one app. And some of those companies are good and let you continue to have access in that super app to what you bought from kind of the constituent applications, but some of them are not. And so while this is kind of coming to my attention from the front end, while this is maybe coming to the attention of people that are, more gamer oriented on the mobile space, I do think this is something that's been happening in certainly more of the casual markets, the kids markets, those kinds of markets, maybe beneath our very noses. And it is something that we're going to want to pay attention to because I don't think there's a different way to do this besides software licensing, but certainly customers can be more aware of what it means. Certainly customers can keep businesses' feet to the fire to make sure that they're getting the value that they are claiming to get from these purchases of games, and not, at bare minimum, allowing third parties to come in and play games with what amounts to the very, very important goodwill for other developers, other publishers, and the platform holders themselves. This has been Virtual Legality for today. If you like this video, please subscribe to the channel. We're talking about this and more all the time. Otherwise, if you caught us on YouTube, thank you so much for watching. And if you caught us on a podcast, thank you so much for listening. And I will catch you on the very next episode of Virtual Legality.